Today on the Frontline Health podcast.
We can do first is there's some simple steps as a country that we need to make. Ban the practice of pre-harvest crop drying. So get that out of the way so there's no residual glyphosate on these products 2 to 3 days before it's harvested. And I think that will reduce a lot of the glyphosate products that we're getting in our food supply. The second is ban the use of PoEA because we know how carcinogenic that is. Get it out of our system altogether. Europe's already done it, so we should be able to take that step and it not affect our food supply. I think reducing the amount of glyphosate in our water supply and saying that it needs to be reduced down to that same zero point 0.1 parts per billion as opposed to 700 parts per billion would go a long way in healthier water and better outcomes, and then reduce that overall glyphosate residue limit in what we're allowed to take in.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Frontline Health podcast by Centurion Health, where we share health news, tips, and insights to help you take ownership of your health. My name is Evan Patrick. With me, Troy Duell, founder and CEO of Centurion Health. We are diving into a very interesting topic today that you've probably seen all over the news. Troy, how are you doing today? You ready to dive into this topic?
Absolutely. Doing well. How about yourself?
Doing great. Just a little concerned about our crops and our food supply in the U.S.
This is a big topic when you're talking about glyphosate with everything that's going on around it, with the Supreme Court ruling that trial that they're going through right now. So ought to be interesting to see how all of this shakes out.
Well, let's get right into it. So our listeners, you've probably heard glyphosate is everywhere. But I really am curious, like, is this just hype or is this a real concern that we need to be paying attention to? How true is it that glyphosate is everywhere?
Well, based on what we've been able to find out and what we know is that farmers went from spraying about 12.5 million pounds of it in 1995 to 250 million pounds by 2014. And today we're doing about 280 million pounds a year. So we are doing about twice the rate per acre compared to the global average in the US. So this is certainly a pesticide that is growing in scope and parameters. So we're not seeing anything in history that's come this close. We're finding it in our waters, and they do certain things now that they didn't do in the past, which one of them is they spray Roundup or glyphosate on the crops just before they yield that crop and bring it up for harvest. So what that does is they feel like it helps increase the drying. So all of your oats, wheat, lentils, chickpeas, all of that, they spray ahead of time, just a couple days before they harvest them, because it helps them dry faster and they bring it to market quicker that way, which some are saying leaves a great deal of residue on our food.
Yeah, I mean, it's really shocking. It's one thing you mentioned that it's in Roundup, and actually this past weekend I sprayed some of my flower beds. I mulched them. I sprayed them with Roundup, and the weeds that I sprayed it on are looking absolutely terrible right now. Just a matter of a couple of days, and they have withered almost entirely. So it's something that I just can't imagine, like that we're actually taking into our bodies through our food. Some people say it's harmless. Others say that it's linked to cancer. So what does the science actually say?
Well, it depends on what you're looking at. If you're looking at regulatory bodies like the FDA, the EPA, they're saying that low-level exposure is really harmless unless it's misused. So that means if you've got direct high-level ingestion, it causes toxicity. And Secretary Kennedy actually said in front of Congress that it causes cancer, which is also supported by a lot of the academic studies that we've seen, as well as the World Health Organization. So really, I think it comes down to the levels of glyphosate and how much we're exposed to on a regular basis, which I think is really becoming more evident that we're exposed to it a lot more than we thought we were in the past.
Yeah, and forgive me for this, but I really have a hard time when we start talking about safe levels of poison that we ingest into our bodies. So
That's one of the more difficult things to think about. If it's a poison, you would think there is no safe level to ingest, especially if you're talking about going for kids or people who aren't adults, because their body can't ingest the same amount of poison that you and I could. But a lot of times they're eating the same foods, which have that same residue on it.
Yep, absolutely. But we're not here to fearmonger. We want to really look at this. So, is the fear overblown, or is this actually something we should be paying attention to?
That's a great question. And again, it goes back to different regulatory bodies. So if you look at the EPA, for instance, they say on oats that you can have 30,000 parts per billion of glyphosate on those oats, and it's okay. It's okay to sell, it's okay to eat. But if you look at the environmental, I think it's the environmental waste group, they allow 160 parts per billion. And they think that anything over that becomes very harmful for children. And then there's another private organization called the Project that tries to keep it below 10 parts per billion.
That's a
And they're
pretty
looking
broad range.
that is a huge range. And if you look at oatmeal, for instance, this one kind of blew my mind when I was looking at things. So Quaker old-fashioned oats, the one with the old Quaker guy on it that everybody
Oh
sees,
yeah.
in the studies and in the samples that they took from it, they have more than 1,000 parts per billion of glyphosate residue in those oats. And then Walmart, their great value instant oats, have about 450 parts per billion in those oats. So, what kind of the differentiating factor seems to be that government agencies look for no observable adverse effect level in animal studies. And then they apply that set to human limits, which I've always thought is interesting. So in this case, they're going with animal studies, but in products that they market, they say it has to have human studies in it, or we can't bring it to market because it's not a viable study. But when it comes to eating poison, they say that it can be an animal study, which has always been an issue. And then you look at it from the advocacy group side of things, which is not very easy for me to say, obviously. They talk about what is the effect long term. So if you have micro doses throughout your life of this, how is it affecting your gut microbiome and how is it affecting your other bodily organs? And they've really done those studies to show in humans what that does over time. And most of these government agencies are only looking at a 6 week to 12-week trial again. They don't see any issues with it at certain levels, and that's how they come up with their proclamations of how much you can intake.
Troy, if I'm being honest, this really can become a very heavy topic for a lot of us. It is, feels that way for me personally, and listening to actually Theo Vaughn of all people, a comedian who's usually just very very goofy on Joe Rogan a while back, talking about this kind of stuff and how we would like to be able to trust these regulatory agencies that they have been looking out for our best interest, and doing a good job of making sure that the food that we eat and the products that we use. We talked about the microplastics and everything, that we're just becoming more and more aware of, and we're just very aware right now that they just have failed in a lot of different areas, and we just can't ignore that fact. And it is very difficult right now for American consumers to really choose things that just like at the very least are not going to give them something in their body that's harmful for them. And I mean, honestly, it is heavy and overwhelming. Just speaking for me personally, I don't know how you feel about it, but this stuff really adds up.
It definitely does. And I think we are getting truly microdosed, as some of those advocacy groups have said. And we don't know the true effect long term of how these things are affecting us. And, I think there has been kind of a dam that broke during COVID where we lost a lot of trust in a lot of our regulatory agencies based on the COVID vaccine and some of the things that they were telling us we needed to do or didn't do. And you're seeing just this incredible momentum not just across COVID now, but you're seeing it across so many other things. And I think this is just another example of it where we're being exposed to glyphosate and those uh, the microplastics and other things like that that we're now going, wait, why have we been putting up with this for so long? And what is the truth behind these things? And I think we as a culture and as the public are really open to real science, but we're not open to just being told, yeah, it's safe, it's safe, it's safe, and not having any evidence to support that. I think if we saw the evidence and we saw long-term studies that somebody had been taking these things for 20 years and there were no effects on their bodies, we would probably look at it and go, okay, this is pretty legit. But we're seeing increases in cancer rates. You're seeing increases in ADHD. You're seeing increases in autism. You're seeing all these things happen that we didn't see 30 years ago. And there's something that's causing it. And I think that's what's starting to generate a lot of this distrust in our regulatory agencies and a lot of distrust, unfortunately, within the medical community because they're just not actually giving us evidence-based uh, facts about our foods and other things that we're ingesting.
Well, this can easily lead us down a road of despair, but that's not really what we're about on this podcast or as a company. What we're really about is helping people take ownership of their health and to inform, our listeners and our customers on, what can we actually do to take ownership of our health. So we want to get a little bit technical for a second, or a little bit scientific. And can we just start with this? What is glyphosate?
Yeah, so glyphosate is the most widely used herbicide in the world. You've already talked about it. It's the active ingredient in Roundup, and it's used ultimately to kill weeds, to increase crop yields, and also to help dry those crops before harvest. So we know farmers rely heavily on it because it's cheap, because it's easy to get, and because it's easy to scale, and they know that it works. So it's going to help with all those things. And that's why it's really part of our farming culture and our agriculture here in the States, especially. And our agriculture in the States provides so much food that there's a fear that if we don't have this, that we're going to see our food supply dwindle. And obviously, nobody wants to see that. But I think the biggest issue is that it's not just about the glyphosate. So Roundup also includes other ingredients called surfactants. One of them is called PoEA, which is what allows that herbicide to really get inside the plant cells and help kill those weeds. But when they've done studies on PoEA, it's shown to be more toxic to human cells than the glyphosate itself, and that it is a highly carcinogenic uh, product, and we've got to be careful when we're combining it with glyphosate in particular. So one thing that we can lean or kind of hang our hat on with that is the European Union actually banned PoEA from their glyphosate-based herbicides in 2016 because they saw these big safety concerns and they didn't see enough risk analysis or risk data to actually leave it on the market. But in the US, it hasn't been one of those things that we have banned. So it's still in that formulation. And one of the reasons I think we have higher issue or more issues with what's being sprayed on our crops because you have that in there.
Well, this is going to be my second Joe Rogan reference, so I'm going to cut myself off after this. But I was listening
Good.
to, yeah, that's enough for one of our episodes. He's got enough publicity already. He doesn't need us.
That's
Um,
right.
so I heard RFK Jr. on Joe Rogan a few weeks ago, explaining that although one of his big things, he's been trying to get glyphosate removed from food production in America. But Trump recently signed an executive order to boost domestic production of glyphosate because our food production system would literally fall apart if our farmers did not have access to glyphosate. If our international suppliers were to cut us off for some reason. So there's like this tension between safety and just practicality when it comes to like us being able to feed our country. And, you would hope that we wouldn't be in a situation where we have to choose between those two things as a country.
You would certainly hope that. And I think there's this internal struggle within the administration because you've got Kennedy on one side, you've got this executive order that Trump has signed on the other side, and they're kind of going at one another. And it's going to be a strange dance, and it'll be interesting to watch and see how it plays out. But really, I'm very, very hopeful that we side on the air of caution because I think if we see it in there and we see that Europe has already done these things, then why not go ahead and do the same here? Because Europe has the same concerns. They have the same issues about food production, and they seem to be able to cope with the fact that at least taking away the PoEA, that surfactant, may be the first step, but we'll see.
Yeah, we know there's several other things going on in the news right now with glyphosate. What's going on with that, Troy?
Yeah, the biggest one is all the news that's happening around the Supreme Court. There's a lawsuit that's trying to push the EPA to act on those glyphosate limits on food, especially oats. That Supreme Court case would impact whether companies must warn about cancer risk, so at least have a little black box warning on food that has glyphosate in it or has been sprayed with glyphosate. And currently, there are about 170,000 different lawsuits tied to glyphosate exposure and the development of cancer. And if this lawsuit is thrown out or, I guess, decided on the side of the glyphosate manufacturers or producers, then all those lawsuits would be thrown out as well. So I think there's also a debate that's going on right now, which is interesting about whether it needs to be a federal label or a state label.
Hmm.
And currently, the glyphosate manufacturers are only wanting it to be one label, which is federally, because they don't want to make 50 different labels on their products, which I can certainly understand that. But at the same time, I think we should raise that bar and really make that label be something that warns people and tells people of what's in their food because I don't think we're doing a good job of that currently.
Hmm. So really getting down to the nitty-gritty and getting super practical, how would you respond to the question, is glyphosate dangerous?
Well, in April of this year, RFK Jr. actually testified before Congress and said that it caused cancer. It is classified as probably carcinogenic by the World Health Organization's Cancer Agency, but we also know in studies that it has been linked to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, to tumors in animal studies, and that there seemed to be some concern about your endocrine function being disrupted and long-term exposure effects. So it's kind of up in the air. The regulatory position, we've already kind of touched on this a little bit. The EPA says that there's no significant human risk when it's used as directed. And that's kind of the thing that they're hanging their hat on, which is used as directed. But many agencies say that the exposure levels in the food is super low and it's not likely carcinogenic in real world use. Um, and this is where it gets kind of interesting, even amongst the agencies. The EPA says the chronic dose per day is 1.75 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, whereas the World Health Organization actually says that should be zero point 0.5 milligrams per kilogram per day.
Hmm.
So in the US, we have a little over three times the amount that the World Health Organization allows. So that's where you're starting to get some questions on why are we allowing so much in our food supply and other things.
Okay, so you've referenced several times how the US kind of compares to other countries when it comes to glyphosate. So what does that look like? How does the US compare to other countries?
Yeah, so the big thing is the US allows a lot more when you're talking about the amounts that they have. So the allowable limit of glyphosate in our water, for instance, is 700 parts per billion, whereas in other countries, it's zero point 0.1 parts per billion. So you're talking about I don't know how many that is. Is that 7,000 times greater amount of glyphosate in our water than other countries allow? The other thing is the PoEA being allowed in our glyphosate products, whereas in Europe they're not allowed to have PoA in theirs. We also have a greater level of allowance for parts per billion in our food than other countries do. So, you have a lot of other countries who are starting to restrict it or ban its use entirely. But that debate, I think, right now is really starting to get to a crescendo where we're starting to hear more and more about it. And I'm sure a lot of it has to do with what's happening here in the States at the Supreme Court.
Well, it definitely sounds like we could learn a thing or two from some other countries and how they're dealing with it.
Yes, in this case, I would agree. There are other things that we need to steer clear of, but in this case, absolutely.
So just to kind of recap, we know glyphosate is bad for us, as you've just detailed, and we don't want it in our food, in our food. But as a country, our system is currently relying on it to keep up with food production. So, can you give us your opinion, Troy, just to wrap this up? What is the way forward for us as a country, and what can we actually do as individuals to take ownership of our health, knowing what we know?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things we can do. First is there's some simple steps as a country that we need to make. Ban the practice of pre-harvest crop drying. So get that out of the way so there's no residual glyphosate on these products 2 to 3 days before it's harvested. And I think that will reduce a lot of the glyphosate products that we're getting in our food supply. The second is ban the use of PoEA because we know how carcinogenic that is. Get it out of our system altogether. Europe's already done it, so we should be able to take that step and it not affect our food supply. I think reducing the amount of glyphosate in our water supply and saying that it needs to be reduced down to that same zero point 0.1 parts per billion as opposed to 700 parts per billion would go a long way in us healthier water and better outcomes. And then reduce that overall glyphosate residue limit in what we're allowed to take in. Now, from a personal standpoint, I think what we all need to do until some of those things happen is we need to look at our fruits, vegetables that we're taking in and go after organic foods because those are supposed to have less glyphosate exposure. There may still be some because if a crop next door has some and it drifts over, there may be some there. So be sure to wash your fruits and vegetables before you eat them and make sure you're going after organic produce because I think that's going to be the best way to really limit that exposure. Get a good water filter so you're getting all of that out of your water supply and staying well hydrated. And of course, exercise and diet are always going to be beneficial because it's going to help flush those toxins out of our system.
Yeah, man, I know this is a pain point for some when you start talking about buying organic, but I will pay the 99 cents extra for some fruits or some vegetables that are organic for this very reason right here, because they're probably going to have not as much, hopefully not any glyphosate in them, but me personally, I'll pay the extra 99 cents.
Yeah, and the other thing it can benefit all of us with is a little bit of portion control. So maybe we can't afford as many as we would have liked, but hopefully that's going to help us lose a little bit of weight and stay more fit anyway if we're doing it the right way.
Absolutely. Well, Troy, thank you so much for sharing all of this info. It's a lot for us to chew on, a lot for us to think about. But again, we don't want people to just feel overwhelmed and go into despair. We actually want people to go out and take ownership of their health. And so that's our charge to you today, as our listeners go out and take ownership of your health because you are your best health advocate. We'll see you next time.
If you enjoyed what you heard today on the podcast, please consider subscribing and leaving us a review. We would love to hear your comments or questions about anything we've talked about on the show. For more health news, tips, and insights, follow us at Centurion Health on Instagram, Facebook, X, and YouTube. And for safe, effective, and affordable healthcare products made in the USA to help you elevate your health and life, visit centurion.health. We look forward to you joining us next time on the Frontline Health Podcast by Centurion.